Oceans are critically important to our economy, to our ecology, to the future of the world. But I wanted to take a few minutes to tell you about the role it plays in our political system, because in the end, that's going to determine what we do with the portion of the globe that is covered by 71% of salt water. Oceans dominate our Earth, and yet there's a real question about how much attention we certainly are paying more attention today than we have in the past. And in the last few decades, that has certainly been true. When Lou Frey was in Congress back in the late 60s, early 70s, we began to see the emergence of an interest. And that, of course, Lou was there at a time when people were civil to each other and the partisan hostility wasn't as severe as it is now. I attribute it directly to his departure from Congress and just wish he would come back. I've spent a good part of my 30 years over 30 years in Washington working on these issues, both in Congress and on the staff of a congressional committee, then with the Department of the Interior, the Department of Commerce, and as executive director of this Commission on Ocean Policy. The interest really started back in the mid-'60s in the Lyndon Johnson administration in a commission that was established by Congress, by Ward Magnuson, and by Scoop Jackson, and by John Dingell, and some names of members of Congress that you may not remember. I think Lou would remember many of them. Ted Stevens played a role. The president of the MIT, Dr. Julia Stratton, chaired a commission that was appointed by President Johnson, and the Stratton Commission published a report in 1969 that was actually delivered to Richard Nixon when he became president. And for about 30 years or so, we sort of skipped and hopped through ocean policy. We established the Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We established the Coastal Zone Management Act. We enacted legislation on fisheries out to 200 miles. We engaged in a number of individual laws. We passed the National Environmental Policy Act in 1969, in part as a direct result of the blowout on oil and gas in Santa Barbara. And we had an interesting and rather rich history, but what had happened since the early 1970s was that there were a number of individual laws that were passed, but there was really a lack of coordination among the laws. In total, we have something like, on statute books at the federal level, we have something like 140 laws dealing with individual species, from endangered species to various fisheries species, to coastal zone, to oceanographic research, to marine science, to sea grant universities. Florida has always been a very important player in the national ocean debate, but that debate has really gone beyond any individual state, and the question has frequently been, what are the legal authorities? What are the financial abilities? What is the political will of the nation to deal with the waters in which people do not live, but people depend on for their livelihood, for their sustenance? Many people depend on it for their protein, and people depend on it for tourism. The single biggest coastal industry in the United States is tourism and recreation. Certainly in this state, but also through most of the other 30 coastal states. You began to hear some rumblings in Congress in the late the Stratton Commission needed to be revisited, a new commission needed to be established. Congress toyed with that. Bills were passed in one house, not in the other house. In the late 1990s and in the early 2000s, getting tired of Congress waiting to act, the Pew Charitable Trust created its own privately funded commission, and it was chaired and put 18 experts in ocean policy involved as commissioners. And the chairmanship of the Pew Ocean Commission was Mr. Leon Panetta, who had been a member of Congress, the chairman of the Budget Committee, had been the director of OMB in the Clinton White House, and had been President Clinton's chief of staff, and then left Washington to go back to his home of Monterey. He was one of the co-chairs, and Christy Todd Whitman was the other co-chair, the Republican governor of New Jersey. So you had a Democrat and Republican co-chairs. When Christy Todd Whitman was appointed as EPA administrator by President Bush, the chairmanship of the Pew Commission fell to Leon Panetta. When the Pew Commission, Ocean Commission was established, the Congress said, no, we don't want a privately funded commission. We want our own commission. And so the Oceans Act of 2000 was established, which would have been the first major publicly funded review of ocean policy in 35 years. The bill was actually signed by President Clinton, but under the terms of the legislation, it only became effective when the new president, whoever that might have been, President Gore or President Bush, took office. The new president would sign the legislation and would actually appoint members, commissioners to the commission. Now, the commissioners actually were 4 direct appointments by the president, but the other 12 appointments by the president came from lists of nominations submitted by the leadership of Congress. And the chairman of the U.S. Ocean Commission was Admiral James Watkins, who had been Secretary Bush 41's, President George H.W. Bush's Secretary of Energy, and had also been Ronald Reagan's Chief of Naval Operations. He reached out to me to be his executive director, and there were 15 other commissioners who were appointed, and we began our work in the fall of 2001. That's the rather scary-looking group that formed the commission and indicates our work there. The gentleman in the middle, one is on the left is Admiral Watkins. The one on the right is Bill Ruckelshaus, who was the first EPA administrator under President Nixon, and then later became EPA administrator under President Reagan. The other members, I won't go into detail other than to point out that toward the back, there's Bob Ballard, who is the oceanographer who at that time was from Woods Hole and was the gentleman who discovered the Titanic. And so we had quite an interesting group of people on our commission. That's the cover of the report that we issued. There is some information about the when we started, the kind of hearing schedule we held, the number of governors that we listened to, and we went all around the country. We spent almost all of 2002 on the road. Once a month, every month, we would hold a hearing in a coastal region, a coastal area of the United States. I think our first hearing was in Charleston, and then our second hearing was a series of site visits here in Florida. Under the terms of the law, we had to provide our report to the President and to the Congress. And the report is about 600 pages. It weighs a little over 5 pounds. You can't take it anywhere you want. It's like a little baby. You just simply cannot take the report with you. And if you include the appendices, it's impossible. But we felt that we needed to include all of the findings that we could, try to make sense out of them, because who knows when the next time would come when Congress would actually pass an authorization for a commission to take a look at our oceans. We it was clear to us that our oceans make a major contribution to our economy, that in fact the oceans, more than $1 trillion, or 1/10 of the nation's annual gross domestic product, is generated within the nearshore areas of our coast. While the contribution swells to over $6.1 trillion, more than half of the nation's GDP when considering all coastal watershed counties, putting tremendous burdens on the water health of our coasts. Ocean-dependent economic activity, fishing, OCS, oil and gas, shipping, and various other activities have contributed well over $120, $130 billion to the American prosperity and supported almost 2.5 jobs. If you take into account our port activity, particularly Baltimore, New York, New Jersey, Charleston, and of course one of our largest ports in Long Beach in Los Angeles, there's a tremendous amount of activity that goes on in our coastal area. Economic activity, but also activity that leads to environmental impacts. With more activity and with more people living along the coast, our coasts are also in additional trouble. Increased populations lead to important growth pressures and environmental impacts, and particularly pollution, particularly non-point sources of pollution. And clearly, although our coasts contribute much to our economy, our coasts are under tremendous pressure because all of you seem to want to live along the coast. Therefore, that makes a major difference. The way the government, the federal government, and in fact state governments are set up to manage coasts are not conducive anymore in the 21st century to handling today's modern problems with coastal population, climate change I'm going to mention shortly, with the economic activity, and with an antiquated system of governance that really emerged in the late 60s and early 70s and has grown piecemeal without a whole lot of coordination or cooperation by the federal governments or by the state governments. I skipped over one of the slides and I don't know how to, can you go back one slide? Thank you. If in a chart form, the mantra that our commission discovered was we must begin to manage our coast based on an ecosystem-based management system. In other words, we must take into account all of the species, all of the activities, all of the ecosystems that play a role in the health of our oceans. Too often in Washington and in state capitals, you have committee systems, you have management systems, you have executive agencies that tend to focus on one single species or one single activity, and you do not take into account the larger picture, ecosystem-based management picture. If we had to distill the 212 and the 600 pages of reports into a chart, this would be what it would be. It would be we need more effective governance, we need improved science. Our science budgets for oceans has been terribly underfunded, and we need much stronger educational systems. On December 17th of 2004, Admiral Watkins, who's there on the right, went over to the Oval Office and delivered to the President the report, and the President signed an executive order. His CEQ chair is there, and his former Secretary of Commerce is standing behind him, as well as the NOAA administrator, and Lynn Scarlett is the woman from the Department of the Interior. The President signed an executive order which created a Committee on Ocean Policy in CEQ. What we and the Commission had called for is a cabinet-level committee on ocean policy to coordinate the activities of the 11 executive agencies and 4 independent agencies that had ocean responsibilities, and to facilitate appropriate coordination. But the administration decided not to do that. Now, I want to remind you that at the same time that we were operating, the Pew Commission under Mr. Panetta was also operating and had issued its report about a year later in 2003. And so what was interesting about the Pew Commission, their membership was different and their charge was somewhat different than ours, was that the Pew Commission and the U.S. Ocean Commission found many of the same things. We really independently of each other. I mean, I knew the members of the Pew Commission, and many of our members did, and I knew many of the staff, but we basically operated in isolation from each other. But when the reports came in, they were remarkably the same, because there's only so many different findings you can make about the state of our oceans. Our oceans are in crisis, they're in deep trouble, the management systems are not set up to deal with them. We must make better investments in science, and we need a new national ocean policy framework. Now, what we proposed was something as on the screen now, a National Ocean Council in the White House, chaired by an assistant to the president, with various, it would be part of the executive office of the president. That's where CEQ is. That's where the Office of Science and Technology Policy is. That is not where any of the cabinet departments are. And we felt that it was extremely important that a committee on ocean policy, or a National Ocean Council as we called it, composed of the secretaries of the departments that had ocean responsibilities, be established in the EOP, in the Executive Office of the President, to get the President's ear, to have a person appointed by the President as an assistant to the President to speak on behalf of oceans, because we had never had that before. That person could then coordinate the 11 departments and the 4 independent agencies and make some sense out of the fragmentation of laws and policies and structures. What the administration came up with, however, was what I have on the screen now, which you probably can't see much of a difference. This is kind of classic Washington speak. This is a chart you really can't get into too much, other than this was established in the CEQ. In the middle is the interagency committee, that they call it the aqua box, because of the color chart they colored it aqua, and that's easier to say. It's composed of undersecretaries of Commerce, undersecretary of the Interior, and various other second-level cabinet officials who were going to carry out the work. We were not completely happy with the way this was handled, but this is the way that the administration has taken it on. And it was determined by Admiral Watkins and by Mr. Panetta that after the end of the 2 commissions, after the reports had been submitted, 2003 and 2004, there was a need to keep something going. So what was established was something called the Joint Ocean Commission Initiative. The awkward acronym is JOCI. JOCI is composed of the 2 co-chairs, Admiral Watkins and Leon Panetta, and members from each of the 2 commissions, Pew Commission and the U.S. Ocean Commission, and it is funded by private foundation funds. It is continuing today. I am retired from federal service, but I am a consultant to the Joint Ocean Commission, and we continue the work of trying to keep the ocean issues in front of the public and in front of Congress. We have our 2 co-chairmen testified last week before the House Committee on Natural Resources. The change in leadership in Congress, we believe, is beginning to have an effect, but there are all sorts of issues that require addressing. There are all sorts of budgets that require better funding. For some inexplicable reason, the United continues to choose not to ratify the Law of the Sea Convention. We do not know why. It's obviously for political reasons, but we think that the time has come for the United States to get into the 21st century and be part. We're the only industrialized nation that is not part of that treaty. And finally, let me just note, since my time is up, and I hope that you may have more questions, I have left out about 90% of what I intended to say. Let me just note that we need money for our oceans and our coasts. We need money for federal agencies, and you need money out here in the coastal states. The Ocean Commission proposed an ocean trust fund be established in the Treasury of the United States to be composed of a variety of federal revenues that come in from activities that are permitted by the federal government in the area called the Outer Continental Shelf. For states, that area is from 3 miles out to 200 miles. For Florida, you actually have the first 9.5, 10 miles on the Gulf of Mexico side, but then beyond that is federal water. On your Atlantic coast side, you only have 3 miles, and then beyond that is federal water. For most states, they have 3 miles. Any activity that goes on beyond that is federally permitted, and generally the revenues go to the federal government. There are a few exceptions, which I won't go into detail now, but we think that a lot of those revenues need to go into a trust fund to be distributed to federal agencies to carry out some of the new requirements by the Ocean Commissions, and to be distributed among coastal states based on population, shoreline mileage, need, whatever. Many of the things that you have talked about during today, and that you're going to talk about tonight, need additional funds. Legislators that were here today basically were saying we need additional funds. And we think the federal government has a responsibility. Let me close with this. It makes good sense to the ocean commissions to take a portion, perhaps a modest portion, of the revenues received by the federal government for the extraction of essentially non-renewable resources, oil and gas and some other things, and give it back to coastal states for the conservation and sustainability of renewable ocean and coastal resources. It would take strong political will. There's deficit financing involved, but we think that that makes sense, and we're going to continue to push. We have a whole list of legislative goals that we have in mind. The Joint Ocean Commission initiative continues, and we look forward to your help. And through the Institute folks here, you can get in touch with me or people at the Joint Commission initiative. Thank you.
What I'd like to do is briefly go through some of the responsibilities of the water management districts, and then talk about some of the challenges that we see facing us in the next few years in this area, and how policy level decisions are being made now that will affect your future and the future of this area as we continue to grow and meet the challenges that we need to meet in this area. And first thing I've done is gone one slide too far. In the state of Florida back in 1973, the legislature set up 5 water management districts in the state. The Northwest Florida, the Swanee River Water Management District, St. John, Southwest Florida, and South Florida Water Management Districts. They did that so that water policy and water regulation could occur on a regional basis. They felt like that they needed to raise that level above the level of local governments because of conflicts that would occur along those boundary lines, but they didn't want to do it at state level because of the regional nature of water. The water management districts were established on surface water divides. As you can tell probably by the names of at least 2 of them, they're around river basins, around the Everglades, around Tampa Bay and that area. So we have 5 water management districts in the state. They're charged with water resource protection in the state of Florida. The way we do that is through a number of different things. In this district, we have a mission statement like most governmental agencies have, and that is that we will ensure that the water resources are sustainable, protected for the benefits of the people of the district and the state of Florida. That means to us that, and legislatively, we've been directed to provide water resources for the needs of the citizens and the environment of the area. First off, the environment and then the citizens. So we have to try to balance the use of water, fresh water in the state, and deliver water for protection of the natural systems. And then any water that's left above that is usable for the people in the area. We do that through something called minimum flows and levels and consumptive use permits. Consumptive use permits are the permits that we allocate water to individual communities from. Minimum flows and levels are the levels of water that we have to maintain ecologically the systems in the state. Remember, the water management districts have been around since 1972, thereabout, and there are pre-existing uses to that, agricultural uses. And so there are some uses that we're still trying to make sure that we have control of. One of the things that happened in 1997 was the legislature told the water management districts that they needed to do a 20-year water supply plan. They needed to look out 20 years, look at the growth, look at the demands of water, and tell whether or not the water sources that were currently being used to provide that water were adequate to provide water for citizens in 2020. And that was to be updated every 5 years. So we're now in the cycle of just doing the 2025 demands and projections. What the St. Johns River Water Management District has found is if you take the population growth and demand for water in the area through 2025, we don't have the water resources that we need from the current source, which is groundwater. It serves about 95% of the water that we use for drinking water in this area and for irrigation and a whole series of other things. About 95% of that water comes from the aquifer, the Floridan aquifer, and we do not have enough resource left in the aquifer to sustain continued growth from the aquifer. Interesting, in this area, the three water management districts, South Florida, Southwest, and St. John's, come together down the Orange, Osceola, Polk County line. The three water management districts, for the first time in 25 years, have gotten together, looked at the science, looked at the groundwater, looked at the withdrawal demand within those three districts, and the three of us have determined that we think that we can sustain growth and sustain demand from those resources until about 2013. That's a short 6 years from now. After that, we'll need to develop alternative water sources to meet our water needs. When you develop an alternative water source, it means that you have to go out and find what that source of water will be and then do the feasibility analysis, do the treatability that will allow you to determine whether or not that drinking water source or that source of water can provide you with the necessary resource to where you can afford to pay for it. We think that there are two areas that we're going to be able to move to in our next level of alternative water source development to help meet the needs for this portion of Florida in the future. The big one for right now is going to be the St. Johns River, taking surface water from the St. Johns, treating it, using it as a water source. That means the price of water goes up. Instead of paying $1 per 1,000 gallons as we are now, thereabouts for groundwater, we're probably going to be paying $3 to $4 per 1,000 gallons for treatment as we move through that area. And then we have brackish groundwater that we can use, and seawater as our ultimate source of drinking water in the area. One of the projects that we and the South Florida Water Management Districts, along with 7 local governments, are talking about right now is the development of a drinking water source from surface water in the Taylor Creek area. That's Taylor Creek Reservoir. It's over on the Osceola, Orange County boundary. It's a freshwater, surface water that comes from the drainage basin in that area. We'll have to augment that with water out of the St. Johns River to make sure that we have sustainable quantities of water within the aquifer within the reservoir to meet that need. As you can see, the cities and the counties that are involved in this are Cocoa, Titusville, Orlando, Orange County, the Toho Water Authority, East Central Florida Utilities, and both the St. Johns and South Florida Water Management Districts. Now, why is it important that cooperation on a regional basis occur for projects like this? It's because any individual that undertakes those projects, the cost would be prohibitively expensive for them. So by spreading those costs over a broader user base, you can reduce the cost to any individual owner or any individual user and make it affordable across the basin. But the decisions have to be made now. You have to start making decisions about alternative water sources now and have them ready for 2013 or shortly there beyond. It takes about 7 to 12 years to bring an alternative source of water on and turn the tap and start to get water from that. From the time you start talking about it from a feasibility analysis point, to the time you do the engineering design on it, to the time you capitalize the project and get it built, test the treatment systems, and then turn the tap on and get water, it's 7 to 12 years. 2013 is when we think the sustainable limits of groundwater in this area will be reached. If you do the math, that gives us about 6 years to make a 7 to 12 year decision. Thank goodness these people have been working for about 2 years, are well into the feasibility engineering design work that will move them to that source. So we think at least this one source will be online and available by 2013. That'll go a long way to meeting the needs in this area for drinking water. The other thing that we're charged with doing is protection of surface waters within the state and within this area. One of the keystone projects in the St. Johns River Water Management Districts is the restoration of the upper St. Johns River Basin. Back in the 40s and 50s, a large portion of the floodplain area of the St. Johns River was removed from its interaction with the river to provide agricultural areas, to provide crops during that period of time. And so they were separated from the St. Johns River, and again, for agricultural purposes. We put fertilizers on them. We used water out of the St. Johns to provide irrigation for crops in the area. And we found that those practices were not only detrimental to the surface water, but also the removal of that floodplain area of the St. Johns River also added to flooding in the area. So during the 70s and 80s, the restoration of the upper St. Johns River was undertaken. We have reconnected about 240,000 acres of the river floodplain back to the river and are providing water quality treatment before those waters are released back into the St. Johns River. Why is that important? It's important for 2 reasons. It's important because the environment depends on that water, and the species within the water bodies that receive water from the St. Johns River are dependent upon good, clean water to provide the ecology that it needs. But also, as I just mentioned, we are in the process of changing over to the St. Johns River as a major drinking water source for this area of the state. And it will provide additional surface water that we can use for drinking water. We have regulatory programs that deal with both of these issues. The Environmental Resource Permit Program, or the ERP program, deals with impacts to wetlands, deals with water and stormwater treatment, and the Consumptive Use Permit process, CUP, deals with the consumption of water. One of the problems we're facing among many surface waters in the state at this point are the impacts of our living along those water bodies, and we're starting to see how those impacts affect us. This is the St. Johns River last year. That green stuff that you see is algae in the water. That algae is caused by nutrients that have made its way to that surface water from fertilizers, from septic systems, from wastewater plant discharges in the area. So we have a high nutrient load in this water body. Program that both EPA at the federal level, the Environmental Protection Agency, the water management districts, the Department of Environmental Protection are charged with carrying out is something called the Total Maximum Daily Load Program. The Total Maximum Daily Load Program is a program that that identifies the assimilative capacity of a water body to maintain its character and its class. In Florida, that's carried out between the water management districts and the Department of Environmental Protection. In this area, we have decided that nutrients are the big problem, fertilizers coming from non-point sources, and water going into the river from wastewater treatment systems. What it means to us is there are things that you can do to correct that. One is the use of reclaimed water for irrigation, moves it away from discharges into the surface waters, gets it back into a beneficial use, increases the period of time until which you will have to go to an alternative water source to meet that need. Secondly is water conservation. If you don't put as much water on your yard, you don't have as much runoff. Fertilizers that you're putting on the grass don't necessarily make their way into surface water, and that helps us in terms of meeting those requirements. I think we're going to stop there and answer some questions.
I have a question from the audience about the highest problems in the oceans, and specifically, what about reefs in the Florida Keys? The highest problems in the oceans are to list, but coral reefs, the protection of reefs, is clearly one of them, and obviously here in this state, but also in the other parts of the Caribbean and other parts of the world, with Hawaii and so on, Australia. There is a Coral Reef Act that has been pending before Congress for some time to provide additional research and additional authority, and it has floundered, but we hope that maybe that'll be one of the bills that pass this time. There is deep concern, Lou, and members of the audience, about the bleaching of coral reefs and the impact of population and the impact of climate change. I mean, one of the things that I did not mention, which I said I was going to, was the role of oceans in climate change and the role of climate change on oceans. And that is something that Anna's committee is going to get into. The leadership of our little group has already had a meeting with the Markey, and Chairman Markey has indicated that oceans will play a role, we hope, in whatever efforts and policies come out of the committee. Oceans are a driver of climate change. They are a carbon sink. The acidification of oceans is a clear indication of the impact of climate change, and oceans also help protect us from some of this. And if the oceans are deteriorating, and if they are being overfished, and if the quality of our oceans deteriorate, the climate change impact is going to be even exacerbated. So we're trying to figure out what kind of legislation is needed, and coral reefs is just part of this larger picture.
In Florida, in the Florida Keys, there are a number of things that the state is undertaking, along with the federal government, trying to address this issue. One of the biggest problems that we had in the Keys was the continued use of septic systems as the main way to treat wastewater coming from homes. A few years ago, legislation was passed in the state that started to move people away from those septic systems into centralized wastewater systems where that water was treated before it was discharged. Again, they're trying to use it in reclaimed water to reduce the stresses on water supply in the area. The other big portion, at least from a Florida perspective in the Keys, was how we were handling water out of Florida Bay, into Florida Bay, all having to do with water delivery through the Everglades, and making sure that those deliveries of water occurred at the appropriate times to help flush the area, to make sure that those needs were being met from a resource perspective. Those things have been ongoing. Water delivery has been improved. They're moving people away from septic systems in the Keys. Those things are things that are being done locally to try to address the problem that folds back into kind of the national and the world oceans issue.
This is directed at Mr. Green. My question is two parts. The first one, you didn't really address, and I'm curious to know how the Water Management District looks at the urban sprawl, and we've kind of paved over the recharges, and we're kind of creating our own problem with that, and as far as the building and the tar and how we're not being able to recharge the actual aquifers that we do use. And the second part is, where is Florida in desalinization? I know that's a fairly new concept as far as because of cost, but is Florida working towards any desalinization? Because if you're going to look down, if you're going to look to 2025, you need to look to 2050 as well.
Number one, we've recognized that as a major problem that we have to try to address. If you look at surface water flows over the last 50 years, and you look at our development schemes, the surface water flows have increased, recharge potential has decreased because we have paved over it. Right now, there's a number of work groups working on stormwater in ways in high recharge areas to ensure that we're using development techniques that hold that water on property longer, give it an opportunity to recharge before it gets shut off to tide in the future. So we're in the process of re stormwater rules for the state of Florida. In those stormwater rules, part of the analysis that's being developed is a pre and post recharge, a pre and post quality treatment methodologies as we move forward in the regulatory side of the world. The second question was a desal question. Yeah, we're moving towards desalinization. Unfortunately, desalinization is the highest cost water source that we have right now. We think that we can get through an interim period with surface water treatment and use that water for the time being. What we're also seeing is membrane technology that's used in desalinization. The cost of that membrane's going down. Technologies are improving. hoping if we can delay going to desalinization for a little longer of a period, we'll see an intersection of the technology curves and the power curves. Quite frankly, it's very expensive from a power perspective, to desalinate water. Prices go down in membrane, energy requirements go down, and then it becomes more affordable. So we're looking at it. One of the big things that we're looking right now is how are we going to handle the disposal of the concentrate that comes out of the desalinization process. Everybody says, let's go to the ocean and get it. Well, there's a byproduct that comes out of that that's a concentration of those salts, and we have to discharge those. How do you discharge them in a way that doesn't cause an impact to the environment? That's part of the analysis.